At some point during Nicole's childhood, her parents separated, and she began living with her mother on the 20th floor of the West Mall Apartments in the Etobicoke borough of Toronto. On the morning of July 30th, 1985, Nicole went down to the lobby of her building to pick up the mail. She quickly returned to the apartment she shared with her mother, as just half an hour from then, at 11, she had plans to meet a school friend for a swim in the pool behind the complex. Jeanette, meanwhile, would remain at the apartment, caring for a group of children as she ran a daycare from her home. Before leaving the apartment at 11 o'clock, Nicole told her friend over the intercom that she would see her in the lobby shortly. 15 minutes later, however, the 8-year-old hadn't appeared. Her friend buzzed her apartment again, asking where she was. Jeanette, however, didn't think too much of it, and suggested that her daughter had perhaps gone ahead to meet another friend or play in the pool by herself. It wasn't until 3 or 4 p.m. that afternoon that the young girl was reported missing. The Toronto police were quick to respond to the disappearance of the 8-year-old. They immediately began searching the building, which consisted of over 400 apartments, and canvassed neighbors. Roadblocks were set up around the complex, and vehicles equipped with public address systems alerted neighbors and locals to Nicole's disappearance and her description. Every door in the building was knocked on, and investigators determined that the young girl had made it to the lobby but had vanished between then and meeting her friend. No further evidence was found that indicated where Nicole had gone or what had happened to her after reaching the ground floor. No witnesses saw the young girl leave the lift. The following day, further Toronto police officers were brought in to assist with the search. Law enforcement also made use of officers on horseback, scent dogs, marine units, helicopters, and ATVs. They focused on exploring Highway 27, which was in the vicinity of the apartment block, and 900 neighborhood residents joined the search. No trace of the young girl was discovered. One neighbor told authorities that they'd seen a blonde woman they didn't recognize carrying a notebook on the 20th floor about 45 minutes before Nicole vanished. While law enforcement wished to speak with her, she was never identified and never came forward. It is unclear if she is at all linked to Nicole's disappearance. In an effort to bring forth answers, Toronto's newly formed Crime Stoppers took on the case and offered a $1,000 reward for anyone who could assist in the return of Nicole and the apprehension of her captor. They also produced a video reenactment of the 8-year-old's last known movements. Furthermore, the Toronto Star, a local newspaper, printed 6,000 copies of a poster which included Nicole's image and the contact number for the Metro Toronto Police, and 3,000 copies of a watercolor sketch of the young girl by police were distributed to other police stations, post offices, and local stores. The hunt for Nicole was the biggest missing person investigation in the history of the Toronto Police Service at the time. 20 detectives worked the case, which was active for 9 months, and over 25,000 man-hours were invested into the search. By November of 1985, 4 months after the disappearance, 6,000 individuals had been questioned, including hundreds of registered sex offenders. Law enforcement offered $100,000 for Nicole's safe return. One peculiar clue found during the investigation was a note written in pencil by Nicole, which read, "I'm going to disappear." It was determined to have been written several months before she vanished, but it's unclear what the 8-year-old meant by the note, and few details are available about it. Around the time this note was found, Nicole's family and acquaintances were ruled out of the investigation. Understandably, Jeanette and Arthur Morin struggled with the loss of their child. Arthur, known better as Art, sought the funds to hire a private investigator and eventually managed to do so, although he was going against the advice of police as he did. He also left his job, set up an office outside of his home, and searched for answers by himself, dedicating all of his time to the hunt for his missing daughter. For a brief period of time, Art and Jeanette moved back in together, but they separated for good 2 years later in 1987. Jeanette, for her part, contacted a psychic in a desperate bid for answers, but neither she nor Art was successful in finding out the fate of their child. In 2004, researchers for a Belgian anti-pedophile organization tentatively announced that they had discovered images of Nicole amongst photographs that had been uploaded to an online pedophile network. They used her pictures from a Canadian police website and biometric analysis to make the match. They claimed there was a strong resemblance between the two, and concluded that it was likely Nicole had not been sold into sex trafficking in Holland, but rather been abused by a sex offender who then sold the images to the network. The organization claims that Toronto police have been made aware of this discovery, but little more seems to have come from this update, and almost no Canadian articles make mention of the Belgian group or their information. No physical evidence has ever been discovered in Nicole's case, and while it is considered cold, both investigators and missing children organizations attempt to keep it in the public eye, hoping to bring in new leads that will one day lead to a resolution. Over the years, several more reenactments of the 8-year-old's last movements have been made. In 2001, an age-progressed image of Nicole showing what she would look like in her early 20s was released. 13 years later, authorities searched a house on Horseshoe Valley Road in Springwater Township after Crime Stoppers received a call which asked the police to revisit a tip they'd gotten in 1985, shortly after the disappearance. It is unclear what the police were looking for, but it seems that nothing came from this lead. In 2019, on the 34th anniversary of the vanishing, further age-enhanced photos of Nicole showing her in her early 40s were released. The police believe that the case will be solved, and it's a matter of when, rather than if. The latest update in the case came in June of 2022, when the Toronto Sun reported that investigators had been digging at an undisclosed location north of the city. They suspected Nicole had been buried there after they received a tip that allowed them to follow up on information they had gathered in 2014. While no remains were found at the scene, the Toronto Sun claimed law enforcement had, quote, unearthed new clues. Last year, the police also considered that a child slayer named Calvin Hoover may be responsible for the disappearance of Nicole. On October 3rd, 1984, Hoover abducted 9-year-old Christine Jessup from her home in Queensville and sexually assaulted, then killed her, dumping her body in a wooded area of Durham. The slaying of Christine and the vanishing of Nicole occurred just 1 year apart, and the pair lived around 70 kilometers from one another. At the time, Hoover was residing in Scarborough, midway between the two girls' homes, and he traveled through Toronto frequently for work. When it was made public that the police were looking at Hoover's possible ties with Nicole's case, they noted they planned to speak with Hoover's wife, whom he was married to in the mid-1980s. It's unclear if Hoover's involvement has been ruled out, or if this is still a line of inquiry which is being pursued. Nicole's mother, Jeanette, passed away after suffering a heart attack in 2007. Her father, Art, is still searching for answers. Nicole Morin was just 8 years old when she vanished from her apartment complex at the West Mall in Toronto on July 30th, 1985. She is described as a white girl with brown eyes and brown hair, and at the time of her disappearance was 4 foot tall and weighed 51 pounds. When she was last seen, Nicole was wearing a peach-colored swimsuit, a green hairband, and red canvas shoes. She was also carrying a plastic bag containing a white t-shirt, green and white shorts, suntan lotion, a hairbrush, a peach-colored blanket, and a purple beach towel. Nicole's case is still unsolved. If you have any information about her disappearance, you can contact Toronto Crime Stoppers at 416-222-84. At around 3:30 a.m., a care worker witnessed the elderly woman sound asleep in her bed. She was not distressed and appeared peaceful. The care worker closed her bedroom door and moved on to the next room. Nancy had been a resident at Riverside since December of 1988. Born in Hamilton, Montana in 1902, she graduated high school at the age of 18 and spent much of her life working as an executive secretary. Nancy was an active member of the Missoula Business and Professional Women's Club prior to her retirement. She never married, had no children, and had little in the way of relatives at the time of her death. Those family members, a sister, 2 nieces, and 3 nephews, didn't live near the care home. By all accounts, Nancy lived an ordinary life in the care home. She was unable to walk, and so she required around-the-clock assistance. There was nothing about her background to suggest there was a target on her back at the time of her death. At 4:30 a.m., 1 hour after Nancy was checked on at Riverside on July 1st, a worker checked on her room once more. This time, however, the alarm was raised. The 87-year-old was gone. The 5 employees on shift scattered across the building in an attempt to locate the elderly woman, but there was no sign of her. 11 minutes later, at 4:41 a.m., the police were alerted to Nancy's disappearance. Law enforcement promptly arrived on the scene, accompanied by search and rescue teams. They carried out an extensive search of the home and the surrounding area. The residence was located along the Clark Fork River, and boats manned by police officers were dispatched along the water. At 6:30 a.m., the search was called off. Authorities had found Nancy, dead, near the riverbank, about 30 minutes downstream from Riverside. She had been murdered in a manner that was described by police as ritualistic. The circumstances of her death were violent, stemming from sexual assault with an object. Her body was then dumped into the water. To investigators working on the case, it soon became apparent that they would have their work cut out for them. The fact that Nancy's body had been put in the water had washed away any traces of forensic evidence, and her diaper has never been located. The police have never put forward a theory about the weapon used in the murder, and it, too, has never been found. Detectives soon theorized that the culprit had entered and exited through Nancy's bedroom window, which faced the river, as the screen had been cut. However, the perpetrator had managed not to leave behind any evidence on the window, or sill, or in the rest of the bedroom. Furthermore, none of the alarms had gone off at any of the home's entrances, and all were in working order. It's unclear if the home was dusted for prints, but given the amount of staff, residents, and guests coming and going from the home, it would have been a very arduous task if it had. The only lead in the case was a man seen by a member of staff at around 4 a.m., walking through the car park of the neighboring Missoula Athletic Club, away from the river and towards East Broadway Street. He is described as being white, between the ages of 30 and 40, and weighing around 180 to 200 pounds. He has light brown, collar-length hair, a moustache, and brown-rimmed glasses, and was wearing an untucked white and brown striped t-shirt, tan-button front shorts, and white tennis shoes with white socks. His t-shirt was longer at the back than the front. This man was never considered a suspect, but was wanted for questioning. However, it's unclear if he ever made contact with the police or was even identified by them. Reportedly, the description led to the police becoming inundated with reports. Due to Nancy's minimal family ties, a family connection was quickly ruled out, after which the authorities turned their attention to staff members. Staff at the care home would be familiar with its layout and its security measures and would know who was best to target. Investigators felt that the murder could well be an inside job and homed in on one male staff member in particular. He was eventually cleared of being involved, but left the care home less than a month later. It is unclear why he left. After ruling out the staff member, the police began to look at the possibility that the crime was the work of an outsider. They noted that security focused on the doors to the home, not the windows, and speculated that Nancy was picked because she was in a room facing onto the river and was not targeted for any reason more specific than that. They interviewed a man named James Bailey on multiple occasions, but eventually dropped him as a suspect. Eventually, detectives looked back at the witness statements they'd collected regarding any other potentially suspicious deaths in the home. One nurse had drawn their attention to the demise of an 86-year-old woman named Bertha Scott, an Alzheimer's sufferer who was discovered dead in her bed on May 2nd, 1990. She was put into restraints at night to stop her from wandering off, and because she'd suffered from heart disease, her death was assumed to be from natural causes. Neither the staff nor her family felt her demise was suspicious, except for the one nurse who'd noted a bruise on Bertha's neck. She was buried without autopsy. Around the time of Bertha's death, the care home staff had also noticed that there had been some tampering with the windows of the physical therapy room, although nothing ever really came of this. On the back of the nurse's comments, the police decided to exhume Bertha's body and double-check her cause of death. Her family was shocked when the police announced that she had actually been raped before being strangled to death. Bertha's life was rather different from Nancy's. She'd been born in Pennsylvania in 1904 and was married 20 years later. She had moved to Missoula just 2 years before her death so that she could be closer to one of her surviving children. 4 of her 6 children had died before her, though she was succeeded by a vast number of grandchildren. During Bertha's medical examination, it was discovered that semen had been left behind. Although a sample was collected, it was too degraded to produce a DNA profile which would help the police find her killer. From here, both cases grew cold. In 1992, a man at another care home was arrested for sexually assaulting one of the residents. However, he was in prison at the time of the murders. The police also suspected Lloyd Chase Allen of being involved that same year, but he too was behind bars when the crimes were committed. In 2002, the Missoulian reported that several of the care home residents had spoken of a man who roamed the halls at night, but staff had never been sure if he was real or not because the residents' memories and testimony were often unreliable. It's possible this man was real and that there are more cases like Bertha's where residents were killed, but it was deemed that they had died from natural causes. However, without DNA evidence, a confession, or further investigation, passionate and loving by all those who knew her, she could often be found tending to stray animals in her spare time. But Caesara's biggest ambition was to become a performer. She wanted to act and sing, and the future looked bright for the determined teen, until her life was horrifically ripped away shortly after her 18th birthday. Caesara was last seen on August 24th, 2019, in Hardin, a rural town less than half a mile off the Crow Reservation, where she lived with her legal guardian and grandmother, Yolanda Frazier. It's unclear where the teen was aiming to go, but one thing is for certain, she never returned home. She had planned the following day to meet with her mother to visit North Dakota, but she failed to turn up for this get-together. Her family quickly noticed that their texts were going unanswered, their phone calls simply rang, and that Caesara was not active on social media, which was perhaps the most telling clue of all that something was wrong. Later that day, Caesara's aunt, Percilia Bultail, went to report her niece missing to the Bighorn County Sheriff's Office, but was told there was a mandatory waiting period before the report could be filed. This was later proven to be a lie. In Montana, anyone under the age of 21 is considered a minor, and an Amber Alert should have been issued. Instead, it wasn't until August 27th that Caesara's family was able to file the missing persons report. The police reportedly told Percilia that the teen was probably out with her friends. There is no record that following her disappearance, law enforcement attempted to search for the teenager. They also didn't hand out flyers, which may have helped trace her final movements and prompt witnesses to step forward. Percilia felt that because of Caesara's troubled past and history of running away, law enforcement didn't take her case seriously. Although much of the 18-year-old's past remains a mystery to the public, it has been noted in recent articles that she had some issues with alcohol. In April of 2019, she was found unresponsive at school because she was heavily intoxicated and she had to be rushed to the ER. Then, on August 29th, a passing jogger discovered Caesara's body by a woodpile in the back garden of a home at the intersection of Mitchell Avenue and Rangeview Drive, in the Hardin suburb where she was last seen alive 5 days earlier. The homeowner was out of town when her body was found and had no connection to the teenager. Caesara's family were not notified immediately that a body had been found. Reports of a teenager's remains being discovered began circulating on social media, and the family caught wind of the rumors. They began to fear the worst. Percilia went to the scene to ID the body, but was turned away without being able to view the remains, and the local media were not alerted to the fact that a body had been found. Caesara's mother, along with Yolanda, then went to the local mortuary so they could view the body on September 1st. But they were informed that the body didn't belong to the missing teen, and so the family continued the search. It wasn't until 10 days later it was revealed that the body was in fact Caesara's. The coroner ruled that she had perished on August 26th and that her death was suspicious. Her remains were already badly decomposed, so the cause of death could not be determined. Asphyxiation could not be ruled out. Following this discovery, the teenager's family kept the pressure on law enforcement to investigate the death. On September 12th, Caesara's mother, Geraldine, was told by Terry Bullis the county coroner and the owner of Bullis Mortuary, that her daughter's remains had to be cremated in order to be returned to the family, despite the fact this was against the family's cultural beliefs and would remove the possibility of further examinations of the body. Furthermore, the family had wanted the Dahl Funeral Home in Billings, Montana to handle funeral arrangements, but Bullis made them use his business and ordered Caesar's cremation before other family members arrived in Hardin. On September 14th, the family located the site where Caesar's body was discovered with the help of relatives who lived nearby. They had attempted to visit the area a few days earlier, but were unable to because the scene was no longer sealed off and there was no demarcation of where the body was found. At the scene, they performed a ritual ceremony and noted that the area was very visible and had high traffic. A neighbor, Jason Cummings, who had found the body, told the family that the police had removed Caesar's phone from her pocket and that he'd told them to charge it so her family could be contacted, although they appeared to ignore this suggestion. He, too, had questioned why the crime scene hadn't been sanctioned off to prevent contamination. 5 days later, on September 19th, the family alerted the media to the case. The Billings Gazette told them that they called the sheriff's office daily for any crime updates and hadn't been made aware of the case. That same day, Yolanda, along with Caesar's father Alan, went to meet up with Captain Mike Fuss of the Bighorn Sheriff County's office. When they asked why Fuss had not made contact with the family or returned their calls, he told them he had been preoccupied with other cases. When they asked why the crime scene had not been sealed off, he explained that if investigators arrived on the scene before uniformed officers, then they did not need to seal off the scene. According to Fuss, the scene was only sealed off if officers arrive first. Then Yolanda and Alan asked why law enforcement had not charged and turned on Caesar's phone. Fuss was reportedly surprised that the family knew about this, and he said that the battery was dead, and so they didn't attempt to use it. Caesar's family countered this by noting that they could have charged the phone and looked at her recent communications, but Fuss said they couldn't get into that phone, and that not even the FBI could. Furthermore, Fuss implied that Caesar had died from alcohol poisoning where she was found, and seemed angry when the family told him they were offering a $5,000 reward for any information. He also revealed that the original investigator on the case, Jeremy Middlestead, had stepped down because he, quote, couldn't handle it. Notably, Caesar's family were not interviewed by law enforcement until this time. They also spoke with the Bighorn County attorney, Jay Harris, who told the family that the coroner, Terry Bullis, had a conflict of interest in his position as a funeral home business and the county medical examiner. Harris also noted that Bullis tended to quickly determine the cause of death as exposure to alcohol and natural causes under his charge as coroner. However, Harris was otherwise reportedly brusque and rude towards the family, and failed to provide them with clear answers to any of their questions, at one point telling them, "How do you know that nothing is being done?" On the 23rd, the family were notified that no missing persons report had been filed for Caesara, and that her name was not in the missing persons database. A week later, the FBI declined to take the case on, stating they needed more evidence that Caesara was murdered on the reservation. Interestingly, just days before Caesara vanished, she had filmed a video of several police officers beating her 15-year-old wheelchair-bound brother and uploaded it to social media. The incident involved several deputies from the Bighorn County Sheriff's Office, leading to several officers being reprimanded. It is believed one of the officers who responded to the scene where Caesara's body was found was one of those involved in the beating. This has sparked much speculation that the police were involved in her death or opted not to investigate in retaliation for Caesara attempting to hold them responsible for their actions. In August of 2021, 2 years after the teenager's death, a fresh report revealed that 4 witnesses had been discovered. The statements of these individuals are not fully consistent, but generally describe a series of events which led to an argument outside of a home on Rangeview Drive at around 3 a.m. on August 26, 2019, involving Caesara and 3 other unarmed individuals, including a 17-year-old girl, 19-year-old woman, and 23-year-old man. Some reports mentioned that Caesara had been hanging out at the house and that an occupant had purchased alcohol for her. Reportedly, her blood alcohol level at the time of her demise was 0.149. The argument that had occurred that night led to another nearby homeowner setting off his car alarm, hoping it would cause the group to flee. They did, scattering in different directions. Caesara was last seen heading towards the area where her body was later found. The new report also mentioned that no foreign DNA was discovered underneath her fingernails and that she was diagnosed with asthma shortly before her disappearance. Caesara's case